Many employers are asking what next after the coronavirus job retention scheme is no longer available and employees can no longer be placed on furlough and the employer obtain a grant through the coronavirus job retention scheme for 80% of the employee's wages, capped at £2,500 per month. And that scheme is available until the 30th of June unless it is extended, and it may be extended if the lockdown measures aren't relaxed before too long, but at this stage employers can only plan for the job retention scheme being available to them until the end of June. Now, when lockdown measures are relaxed, some employers will be able to bounce back quite quickly, bring everybody back and pay them full pay for their full contracted hours. Other businesses may be a little slower to see the wheels start turning again, and it may be that come the 1st of July, if that's the date on which the scheme is no longer available, that you just aren't ready to have everyone back at full capacity. And at that stage, we're probably back to having some of the conversations that we had before the job retention scheme was announced around unpaid layoff, reduced hours or redundancies. Now, it would be important to check contracts of employment to see if the employer has the right in the contract to reduce hours or to reduce hours and to only pay for the hours worked, or place employees on unpaid layoff for a temporary period in the event of a downturn of work. Now, if the employment contract does not permit the employer to impose those measures, the employer will need to consult with any employee that it proposes to place on layoff or reduced hours. Now, if the alternative is redundancy, then it's likely that employees in a lot of circumstances will agree to a period of unpaid layoff or reduced hours to safeguard the long-term viability of their job. But it's still important to go through that procedure of obtaining consent unless the employment contract specifically allows for it. But of course, unfortunately, in many circumstances, the placing of employees on reduced hours or temporary layoff won't be sufficient, and there will be a longer term downturn, and redundancies may need to be made. And so employers need to begin thinking that through, and if that is a possibility, then thinking through when you need to start consulting with employees in relation to that. Now, in most circumstances, there isn't going to be an immediate rush on that. There is no minimum period of redundancy consultation unless the employer is making more than 20 employees redundant at any one establishment. If the level of redundancies are below that level, the employer does need to consult and follow a proper process, but there's no sort of minimum statutory consultation period. So the important thing to think through in most circumstances where there's fewer than 20 employees being made redundant at one establishment is in relation to when you want to serve notice of termination of employment. If notice is served while the job retention scheme is still available, then some of the notice period could be served on furlough, and therefore the employer can avail of the grant through the scheme to fund some or all of the notice period. If, however, the employer waits till towards the end of the job retention scheme or after the job retention scheme is no longer available to serve notice, then the employer will be left to fund 100% of the cost of the notice pay, in addition to any redundancy entitlement that the employee will have on termination of employment. So while I don't want to encourage employers to unnecessarily rush into redundancy consultation exercises, it is important to think through when notice can be served and what that means in terms of cost if it's done sooner rather than later, taking account of the notice period and the availability of the job retention scheme, as far as we know, only until the 30th of June.